Okay, if you're an AC/DC fan, I have a video here I think you're really going to enjoy. I found this article that I'm going to share with you on total accident. I was doing research for something different, and I stumbled across this. And the reason I wanted to share this today is this is from a newspaper on October 13th, 1980. And so almost, what would that be? Almost 24 years to the day. When I'm making this video today, it's October 16th of 2024. And so I thought, anyway, it just kind of caught my attention. And then I saw this headline, AC/DC Gamma Blast at Civic Center. And what this is basically a concert review of a concert that was done on the Back in Black tour back in 1980. And I think it's so fascinating going back and reading these things, what people were saying back at the time. Because now, here we are, again, 44 years later, and we have all this hindsight of all the things that have happened in between. And we didn't realize at the time the impact that album was going to have, and the kind of legend status that AC/DC would eventually reach because of all this stuff. Of course, they were heading toward legend status because previous to this, they'd had Highway to Hell, and then Bon Scott had died, and then what's going to happen to AC/DC? They're just starting to kind of really take off. And then they very, very quickly get this new singer in named Brian Johnson, who's a pretty kind of an unknown. And they bring him in here and they record this new album that they call Back in Black. And it ended up, in my opinion, and I've shared this before, unapologetically, it is the best rock album ever made, period, in my opinion. And I just don't think you touch it. I think it's just too good in too many ways. Hey, hold on for just a second. We'll get right back to the video. But if you like this stuff, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave any comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we really, really appreciate it. Anyway, with that, back to the video. And it also is one of the top-selling albums of all time as well. So I think that even that's a little bit of evidence of how great the thing was. So anyway, but I think you'll like this article because they go into a little bit about that concert. And I was too young. I mean, I knew who they were. A friend of mine got the album and I loved listening to it. I mean, you hear the opening of Hell's Bells and you're just blown away. And then the song Back in Black is so great. And I mean, the whole album is just spectacular. But they toured, and I was, 10 years old or something like that, 11 years old at the time. So I didn't go see him or anything, but I'd really love, if you were going to concerts at the time you saw it, I'd love to get your feedback if you saw this at this time when it was the early days of Brian Johnson in AC/DC. All right, so here we go. AC/DC Gamma Blast at Civic Center. Australian heavy rockers AC/DC. Oh, this is the Morning Union, October 13th, 1980, and this is on page 19. Nick Emelio, Union staff. Australian heavy rockers AC/DC appeared at the Springfield Civic Center Friday night, playing selections from their several albums, including the latest, Back in Black. The rowdy crowd of over 8,000 saw the five-member band crank out the kind of heavy metal that is kin to the likes of Ted Nugent, Kiss, and Judas Priest. AC/DC, like the above-mentioned bands, specializes in prehistoric volume rock that should be met. This is so funny. I love prehistoric volume rock. That should be a title for something. It's so great. Specializes in prehistoric volume rock that should meet the same fate as the dinosaur in a few years. Again, one of the reasons I love reading this stuff is because we have hindsight now. And here's a guy looking at this going, stuff's going to be gone. No one's going to be listening to it. It's going to go the way of the dinosaur. And yet, You Shook Me All Night Long, that song alone. This weekend, go to a karaoke and somebody's probably going to be singing that song, if not a group of people with microphones singing it. It was that impactful, and it's still impactful. And those guys are still filling up arenas and stadiums. Okay, on the strength of this, by the way. They serve the sole purpose of playing simple rock loudly and filled with distortion. They also seem to attract a younger crowd than the majority of rock acts. But when it comes to real music, they are out to lunch. AC/DC has only 3 or 4 choice songs, the rest being rather mundane and devoid of imagination. The band attempts to make up for its lack of real talent with onstage action, most often centering on the demented antics of lead guitarist Angus Young. Of course, Angus is the one that wears, he's got the schoolboy outfit, which he still does, at his advanced age. And it's funny to listen to this stuff because the reality of it is a lot of their music is just, they call it heavy metal. It's just straight ahead rock and roll. I mean, the chord progressions are very simple. They're most of the stuff they do is very, very basic, straight ahead rock and roll. And so what he's saying, what he says there, only 3 or 4 choice songs, a lot of the stuff has a similar energy to it. And so, but there's so many so I don't know what he's saying here, that there's only a few that really stand out. But the reality of it is you go into some of those albums and even go deep into some of those records, and they just, even the basic nature of so many of those songs, the basic rock and roll nature, they still are just, they have the right energy, the right approach. Angus Young was not any sort of a guitar god or anything like that, but he was so tasty. The stuff was so good. And yes, he was great on stage. Anyway, so here we go. Jerking across the stage in a schoolboy in his schoolboy short pants and suit, his head flailing wildly, Young is the mold for the band's bad boy image. Leering at the audience, Young removed his shirt before he mooned them. Just one of many displays of juvenile behavior. Young's guitar playing... But it was so much fun, just the goofiness of all of it. Young's guitar playing leaves a lot to be desired. That to me is one of the most uninformed, silly statements that somebody could possibly make. His stuff is brilliant. It's simple, but I mean, go listen to "You Shook Me All Night Long." The solo that he plays there, you can sing it back because it's that catchy and it's that good. He's spectacular in the simplicity of it all. Leaves a lot to be desired. I could not take more issue with a statement from somebody than that right there. Leaves a lot to be desired. He is tasty, and so many of the things he does is just spot on, as good as it gets, in my opinion. He can play the 3 or 4 chords needed per song, but his leads are mostly forgettable. Totally disagree with that. Like I said, go back to these things and you listen to what he plays, and you can so often just sing back, and you wouldn't want it any other way. Maybe other people watching this will disagree with me, but I think that most of the time that's true with his stuff. 90% of AC/DC's material would be vastly improved with more imaginative playing on Young's part. The rhythm section of guitarist Malcolm Young, drummer Phil Rudd, and bass player Cliff Williams pound out predictable backing for the lead guitar and Brian Johnson's vocals. Johnson replaces original singer Bon Scott, another rock casualty who went the Keith Moon route a few months ago. Kind of an obnoxious statement, but okay. Johnson carbon copies Scott's Sandpaper Screaming. Again, this guy has, in my opinion, has no idea what he's saying there. Johnson carbon copies Scott's Sandpaper Screaming, maybe in the energy of it, but even that I don't think is the same. Because one of the things about Brian Johnson is, to me, he didn't sound anything like Bon Scott. Their voices were so different. And Brian Johnson's voice, weirdly, was perfect for Back in Black, but he's not the same on the old stuff. Bon Scott had a very, very unique voice, and the two are very different. So I don't know. I don't go along with that kind of a statement. Carbon copies Scott's Sandpaper Screaming, which gives Back in Black, going back up to the top of the article, the same sound as the previous albums. Again, to me, Back in Black is they've matured. They're growing. They continue to, actually, to me, that's their pinnacle. Even though they have a new singer, they don't have Bon Scott, that was when they really, really hit the greatest thing they did. Since this is AC/DC's first tour as headliners, it seems ironic that the band, so preoccupied with death as a central theme, needed an actual death to make it big. Back in Black was produced by Jeff Mutt Lang, who will also be working on Foreigner's upcoming 4th album. AC/DC set opened with large black curtains, parting to reveal a large Hell's Bell, lowered towards the Kiss-like stage. Johnson came on stage and began hitting the bell with a hammer, starting out with Hell's Bells from Back in Black. The band paused before going into Shot Down in Flames from the Highway to Hell album of 2 years ago. The only songs that stood out all evening were the Highway to Hell and High Voltage title tracks. Highway to Hell also, while I think Back in Black may be the greatest album of all time, and definitely, in my opinion, AC/DC's best album, Highway to Hell may be, if not the greatest rock anthem of all time, in the top 5 greatest rock anthems ever written. So that was on the last thing that Bond did. TNT and You Shook Me All Night Long. Oh, title tracks, TNT and You Shook Me All Night Long, finishing up that sentence. The rest were simply head knockers that, despite some good moments, were rather boring. These included Sin City, Back in Black, Just a Bad Boy, Money Honey, and Let There Be Rock. The band's most original moment was when Johnson ran into the general admission crowd with Angus Young perched on his shoulders, playing the lead for High Voltage. The pair ventured far into the crowd and then took the stage to finish the song. The best music of the evening came from the rocking opening act, Gamma. This is just funny. Featuring respected industry guitarist Ronnie Montrose. And you gotta love Ronnie Montrose. I mean, that guy is brutal guitar player. Of course, he had his own band, Montrose. Sammy Hagar sang for that group. But just interesting the way that they put that in perspective at AC/DC concert, containing hard rocking along the same idea as Sammy Hagar with blues, fusion, and synthesizer flavor. So he just new Montrose band that has similar to Sammy Hagar stuff, and with the right touches of pop and FM airplay. And then he goes on and talks a little bit about Gamma. So I just thought you'd get a kick out of this, and I don't inject so many of my thoughts so often into these things, or at least my opinions. But this one was so kind of, again, when you have these things, when you have the 40 plus years in between, and you now going back and reading this stuff, and you know the backstory, and you know how it all ended up, it's so interesting reading this stuff and getting the opinions of these critics at the time, a guy like this that really believed that this just wasn't going to last, that wasn't going to, a few years from now, all this stuff's going to blow over, when the reality of it is that album has stood the test of time as much as any other album has. Back in Black, the tracks on that thing still today, Hell's Bells, you put that thing on, throw that thing on in your earbuds, throw it on in your car, and that intro to that song, and when it kicks into the beat, you can't beat it. It's still, to this day, it holds up against anything that anybody puts out. It's spectacular. While so many things of the time didn't hold up, this definitely did, in my humble opinion. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you saw him on this tour, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. I know that Brian Johnson, every live show I've ever seen of him, he's never been able to really, really do what he did in the studio. You hear interviews with Brian Johnson talking about that, and he was brand new in the band. And you hear him when he talks about that thing, he's like, man, I was in the studio giving it every bit of energy I possibly could. You know, this is his big chance, his big break, and he just put it all out there in such a way that, like a lot of people, they could never really reproduce live what was going on in those moments in that studio. But boy, did he nail it, and we have that recording. So anyway, if you saw them in concert, especially on this tour, what was that like? What was the experience like? And if you're an AC/DC fan, and you have those two periods when it was all changing, that Back in Black period, what was that like for you? Because for me, I was introduced to AC/DC when Back in Black came out. I didn't know the Bon Scott stuff. I discovered the Bon Scott stuff later. I was introduced to AC/DC with Back in Black, and so that the Bon Scott stuff was new to me later. And so I have probably a little bit bias built into that. But what if you're a little older than me and you experienced that? What was that like? Were you able to make that transition? And what did you think of Brian Johnson coming in and taking over the reins there? And what did you think of that album once that came out? Anyway, please follow the channel, like the video, share this with other people that like this kind of stuff. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.